Welcome back to the Oberlin Speaker Series. Today we're kind of turning the tables. We have Doug Younger as our guest. We are calling this Creating Entrepreneurial Inspiration. And as I stated, this is Doug Younger, CEO and founder of 3 Steps Forward, host of Twist of Fate, which is a small business podcast. Doug has led multiple insightful conversations with incredibly talented founders, entrepreneurs, and innovators. And during this series, he has knocked it out of the park. He's a great host, has great guests. And as I said before, now it's time to turn the tables on Doug, have him be our honored guest. So Doug, let's just start with, tell us where you're from and start us there, and then we'll keep going.
Yeah, no worries. First, I got to say much love to the Obies out there. This series is about making the world a better place, and it couldn't have happened without the students that have attended. So much love and big shout out to the 118ers. My story, man, so I'm a native Clevelander. I grew up in Cleveland Heights, Ohio. I had 2 parents that were, my father was an entrepreneur. He was a financial planner. It's where a lot of my financial literacy came from. My mother was an educator, and she worked for Cleveland Public Schools District. And obviously now I'm an educator. So you can start to see some of the legacy of the generation before me start to play into my life. I did my undergraduate school at Bowling Green State University. I then attended and did my MBA at Case Western. So I'm very much a Clevelander. And I just have to say, I think I always had this tremendous respect for Oberlin because it was a special place that I hadn't found for myself yet, but the creatives went there. And what you'll see is I'm actually a really creative person, but that part of myself back then, I wasn't comfortable sharing with everyone. Mm-hmm. If you look at the forms of communication, or if you use an assessment tool like DISC, which is essentially the different communication styles of dominating, influencer type, conscientious type, steady. A lot of people will say I'm a D. Mm-hmm. When actually, I scored I early in my life. I actually don't like, back then I didn't like larger social situations and things like this. But what changed that aspect of me after graduating, I went off and was picked up by the corporations, big companies, Fortune 500, big players.
So let's stop there. So I'm going to take you back here. Tell me, because you mentioned your parents, tell me what values you have.
Oh yeah.
What are your values?
So this is a fascinating thing, right? Like, I remember a true story. My father, I told him I was going to go to MBA school. He said, that's a terrible idea. And I go, what are you talking about? You work in business. And he says, you are too smart for business. See, his view was, you are pre-med, you comprehend biochemistry, you're published in the Journal of Forensic Science. For him, that didn't sound like what a business person is. He also made the comment that business is hard nosed. There are situations that you will run in where people will lie, cheat, steal, that they get further with a pinstripe suit and a Rolex watch. So what you could already see that the personality types of my father and I were different. He was a way more of the entrepreneur that is risk averse. And in truth, notice like going against the wishes of my own father, I became a business person. Mm-hmm. And that shows that I am more of the risk-taking type of entrepreneur. Okay. So I would just say that my value system, I think because I have Cleveland origins, legacy is number 1. 2, the financial literacy part, that was beaten into me. Higher learning, it came from my mother. And I guess if you wanted to look at Douglas Younger III, what is that? My unique contribution to the category. There's no question I was the risk taker.
Okay.
I mean, traveling to over 40 countries, over 1 million miles, being the first African American in leadership programs, just putting myself out there. Look, I was the native Clevelander from a little small suburb of Cleveland that went out to battle the masses. And I think that maybe that was the unique difference between me and my value system back then. That I got milk, you know. I found myself.
Totally get it. And so then take us through this journey of, you've given us your value, you've given us your psychological profile. Take us then on this journey into your first job after your leave case.
Yeah.
So talk to me about that.
So to clarify, and some of the 118ers know about this. So the transition to graduate school and getting an MBA was hard for me. The acronyms, CAPM, capital asset pricing model, or BEP, IRR, like internal rate of return, break-even point. I was like, what are these people talking about? And I even think culturally speaking, I felt I didn't fit in. That doesn't mean that it was true. I just felt like I didn't fit in. And I can tell you that to offset these things, I put myself through extreme paces. First of all, my wife will tell you, I started setting my clock 1 hour earlier than I had to get up to go to school, and 1 hour later after when I was really supposed to go to bed to read. Wired, Fortune, Forbes. I just read everything. Harvard Business Review, which the 118ers will know, like I swear up and down by the Harvard Business Review platform. I just started reading to offset and close the gap. Secondly, I put myself out there, and that's something that I talk about now as an entrepreneur network every day of your life. I went to all of the career fairs, National Black MBA, National Hispanic MBA. I even went to Women in Business. Why? Because my view was I wasn't going to not get the opportunities I needed for economic advancement for a lack of not trying. What was special, though, is that my first MBA internship, which I view as still my first job I'm really proud of, was at GIDEN Corporation, which was a company acquired by Boston Scientific for $27 billion in Minneapolis, Minnesota. First of all, GIDEN was a family. And I can tell you that summer, they changed the course of history for me. You see, it's still the Midwest, but at that time, Minneapolis had, it was like 25 Fortune 500s. So there was all these smart, transient, young people there, changing the city, working in fields of medical technology, healthcare, all these things. And GIDEN taught me so many things. I joined a group called Emerging Technologies, and I was writing business plans for new medical innovations like mesenchymal stem cells or vagus nerve stimulation or drug-eluting stents, like things that are now commonplace. Back then was innovative and inventive. But I'll tell you the thing that they really taught me is really a lot of my insecurities growing up as a Clevelander and going out in these environments where, look, there were Harvard grads, Booth grads, like these Ivy Leaguers, and to compete. And I'll tell you why. Like I did one talk, and one of the directors of quality said, "Doug, your talk was sensational, but it's missing one thing." And I said, "Andy," his name is Andy Jungman. He said, "Doug, you don't know yourself until you jump out of a perfectly legitimate airplane voluntarily." And I said, "Skydiving. Andy, you want me to go skydiving?" He said, "Brother, I won't let you do it alone." So I started training for a 13,000 square foot jump. That means no tandem. Nobody's pulling my ripcord, right? And I jumped, and I can tell you the old Doug Younger and any of the insecurities and fears I had of not having opportunities, as I jumped out of the airplane and I saw it getting smaller and smaller. And the first thing I thought is, can I go back? Like, this is crazy, right? The wind is hitting me, the sun is hitting me. This is outrageous. And in my mind, I knew when I look back, there's no going back, there's only going forward. And that fundamentally, I think the entrepreneur was born out of that experience. So that was my first job. And I am, if I still run into guiding people, and if they're watching, like, I love you guys. I wouldn't have been the success I was without A, working in emerging technologies where it was a thought intensive role, and B, just being pushed out of my comfort zone. I mean, I was doing ice fishing, tubing, like throughout my time at GIDEN, like, they really showed me to adopt new cultures, to network, you just got to close the gap.
Right. So you're working at these corporations. Yes, you have these sparks of entrepreneurship. You jump out of a plane and it sparks these thoughts in your head.
I should say this.
Yeah.
A lot of the corporations in the roles, so I was working in product management, creation of new products. A lot of people expected me to be a change agent, which is kind of like being a rebel in a big organization. Like the philosophy is if a big company is going to innovate, it's going to cannibalize itself, which would make me kind of part of the bad boy, bad girls of the company. And that was incredibly hard. I mean, I felt like I was fighting wars just to get things done.
Yeah.
But no, again, this is a great entrepreneurial test bed because I learned so many things. I commercialized over 10 products, FDA cleared worldwide. I was in Japan for 2 weeks, and US for 2 weeks for 4 years. I was in Korea for 2 weeks, and then back in the US for 2 weeks. So I traveled and I learned a lot of things about people. So yeah, I just wanted to say that I think the corporations allowed me to still kind of have this entrepreneurial experience.
And then you make this conscious transition, and I'll put this in the context as I know it. So you and I meet many years ago.
In Vienna, actually, in Vienna.
Well, yeah, I show up in Vienna to hang out with you.
Yeah.
You're doing some imaging conferences and things like that. And you and I had a couple candid conversations throughout the time. So tell us what you were, this entrepreneurship feeling, this is important. What are you feeling inside as you're considered successful in the organization? But you were saying to me, I'm just not feeling it. Yeah.
I love that you brought this up. So we just had a class in my here on Oberlin 118 that I talked about building momentum and confidence. And I don't think the students really know the topic of that lecture was coming from a very personal place. I was making a lot of money at these corporations, and I was pumping that into my soulmate, my wife, who was becoming a doctor at the time. But I always had the seeds of discontent in corporate. I think some of it was the culture and the way things get done. It's very process oriented. And the problem I had with process is that any opportunity in entrepreneurism, there's a window of opportunity. You can't move at the pace that the organization wants to move. You got to move at the pace of the market. You got to move at the pace of the opportunity. And I just didn't feel I could move as fast as I could or be as nimble or agile as I wanted to be. That's not a shot at those corporations. It's just the way I felt and the way I fit in there. I'll also say that there is a lot, any political construct that has multiple people, intelligent people, is going to have complex methods of making decisions. You can't just make the call left or right. You can't just instinctively do things. Even if you know it's the right thing, you have to have this due process and checks and balances. And that drove me crazy as well. So I already knew that my entrepreneurial spirit was not being fed. And I think by the time I met you, I was already looking at, one, I left New York, which I was living at the time, and I moved to San Francisco, which one, I always wanted to be Californicated. Like, you know, this goes back to the 90s when I was in high school at Villa Angela, St. Joseph, like, you know, that West Coast versus East Coast, the whole Tupac Shakur, like California love, that left an impression, right? Like I was like, this is it. I really wanted to move to California. But really, at that time, Google had gone through its auction and was booming. Facebook was on the rise. Twitter was on the rise. And I told my wife, I said, I felt that not just my employment, but the city I lived in, like New York, is not growing and changing like Silicon Valley. So we moved there. And I think that says a lot about surrounding yourself with like-minded individuals. I joined the San Francisco Virtual Reality Society, SFVR, and I was be going to the like hackathons and like the whole rise of Oculus. And, you know, I started going to Comic-Con. I went to 6 Comic-Cons, where I met Stan Lee, Todd McFarlane, like, and I just felt that access to these creative people wasn't this black hole that I used to think it was, that these are real people and I'm like them. So I can go and do something different. And I think that was key. I know it was key for my transition later to be an entrepreneur.
So for the students and the folks listening, how do you know when to make the jump?
Oh God. Yeah. Okay. So I left my corporate job. I started working actually in robotics and wearable robotics, actually. Ekso Bionics, great company. They make a wearable exoskeleton for people that have stroke or spinal cord injury to be able to walk again upright. Meeting the founders of that company and the leaders there, Russ Angle, Nate Harding, Tom Luby, these were the first, like, I mean, mad dog entrepreneurs. Like they go IPO and Nate has like a cowboy gallon hat when he rings the bell. Like that's mad dog rebel behavior. And it was at that time that I felt if they could do it, I could do it. But I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. So I had a little black book of ideas I used to just write down. All kinds of things. Beyond just business stuff, like, you know, aerospace design, or I always told myself I was going to buy like a garage somewhere and invent. A lot of people don't know that. Like there's a tinkerer in me. If you ever saw my house in California, I was a tinkerer, right? So around 2018, my father passed away. And that was a pinnacle moment because my mother had passed, my father had passed, and I have no siblings. So at that time, I'm thinking, I'm totally untethered now. Like, I have to now figure out what I want to be known for, what my legacy will be, and the type of man I wanted to be. And I can tell you, all of those experiences up to that started, I knew, okay, it's time now. But then it was about, what am I going to do? So actually, what a lot of people don't know, in 2019, I wrote, I believe, 5 business plans. 5. So I left my life in corporate voluntarily. Like I quit. Just that's it. I started supporting some nonprofits There was an AI company at the time that's now public, and some energy companies, just as a consultant to see things, to see problems, and to see how they operate. And then I wrote 5 business plans. 1 for a technology marketing company that would help other startups. 2, if you're ever going to achieve influence, infamy, you have to control your own narrative, which means we knew we were going to start a new podcast. So I wrote a business plan for a podcast. 3, I wrote a business plan for a real estate holding company. 4, there was a nonprofit. 5, there would be an ed tech company that would provide webinars and advice to entrepreneurs. 5 businesses. And now you know some of them. Right. 3 Steps Forward is one of them. Yep. Twist of Fate is another. There's what's called the Younger Family Estates. That's the 3rd. And the other 2 is kind of shrouded in mystery until I'm ready to kind of come out with them.
Okay, so, great. But let's get into the nitty gritty. Does someone need to say, I have this amount of money saved? This is my backup plan. What literally should they be thinking? Or do they just take the leap if they have that?
No. Okay. Don't ever just take a leap. I want everybody listening to understand a strong point of what I said. I took 2019 to write 5 business plans. It wasn't until January 3rd, 2020, did I incorporate 3 Steps Forward, the first of those businesses. So I took 12 months to gather myself. 1, don't ever start a business without a business plan. At least the shell or the skeleton of, this is what I want to offer. This is the value I create. This is what the pricing is. Do I make money doing it? You have to figure that out first. Don't ever just take the jump. Secondly, and I talk about this to the 118ers. Nothing happens without working capital. Coincidentally, where I was in my life, I had all my corporate winnings. I had my own estate that I had built. I had bought a beautiful California property. And I had, because both of my parents had passed, their multi-generational wealth passed to me. It's not a ton of money, but I had resources. So 1, my wife and I had a very strong conversation about the future, and that because we had children, she also didn't want to see me go back to my old life. So like jumping out of the plane, there's nowhere to go but forward. So we decided to use our own working capital. I would say no business owner or majority owner should start a business not without at least a $10,000 commitment to the business. And the best way I can phrase it is commitment. Now, I can tell you, 3 Steps Forward, over 5 years, we've grossed over $2 million in top line revenue. But I had to put, I'd probably say $500,000 of working capital to even get there. But it's a lot like card games. You got to be all in. You cannot think of entrepreneurism the same way you thought about, like, when I was in my corporate job, it's like, well, if I get laid off or I get fired, I'll just get another job. There is no tomorrow. You have to look at business. There is no tomorrow when you're an entrepreneur. And you will fight harder. Having started January 3rd, I mean, just to talk the timeline. January 3rd comes, we got our first 3 clients within 45 days. By the 3rd month, we had 5 clients. The 3rd month was the same month as the COVID lockdown. COVID lockdown comes, all 5 clients are gone. I remember the employees at the time, they were really like, so we're done, right? It's over. And I looked at them, it's not over. We went to my LinkedIn network, we went to my mentors, went to my sponsors. Within 30 days of that, we had 12 new clients. And our revenue started really kind of moving up. By the summer, I'll tell you what it was. At that time, businesses, some were succeeding, some were failing, and there was no like rhyme or reason. Like business that has a great business plan still failed. So it was about treading water and just surviving through it. But yeah, I think it was maybe 2 years after that, we did our best year, over $500,000 in revenue, like in like 6 months. Like it was.
And I don't want to blow over this. Some people would have looked at their employees and said, it's over.
It's over, yeah.
Why did you say it's not over?
Yeah. So it comes back to why you want to be an entrepreneur. I've seen a lot of people go into business and think you go into business to get rich. I don't agree with that at all. If you really get down into the lowest common denominator definition of business, it's a mutually beneficial transaction between two parties. So I knew that this business, one, was about creating value for a segment that there's no agency for. There's no help. Like an entrepreneur, if you really talk to any of the entrepreneurs, and many of them in the room have saw with so many of the guests, there's this feeling of being alone from some of the gut punches. Some of the, an entrepreneur gets beat up real bad. But I wanted to create an ecosystem that was friendly, helpful, insightful, and we could help entrepreneurs. If we could make one of them not fail, we succeeded. Now, I'll tell you another thing that made me say that, frankly, I'll never give up, ever, on 3 Steps Forward, because it's a legacy business. If you go to the About Us, about 3 Steps Forward, my dead father and my dead mother and I as a child are listed on the 3 Steps Forward site.
Yeah, sure.
I did that because so many people will come to us and say, this is a great technology forward marketing group. They're not normal. They can do coding in VR. They've done, crowdfunding on the Seed Invest platform, raising 5.8 million for a Series A startup. But we're a family. And for many of the employees, which I call alumni, legacy employees, I still care about them. I still want them to be successful. Maybe I wasn't able to pay them what Google or Apple could pay them, but that's kind of like a false expectation that any startup can compete with something like that until later on, right? But at the end of the day, I've created a lifestyle business. It's to help people get from A to C. And, my philosophy on that is my legacy as a younger family member. My father helped small business with finance. I helped them with marketing and fundraising and all the other things that come with it. So that's what brought us through the doubts. And look, there's nights. I still do. But I think that you could see there was a point in time when things got real hard that I told my CFO, my fractional CFO, and my COO that you guys might be seeing my life's work, because entrepreneurism brought the best out of me beyond humbling experience. It forced me to be the guy that I always said I needed to be, to sleep less than everybody, to grind more than everybody, to know more than everybody. And later on, it paid off, man. I mean, look, we were official partners of the Sacramento Kings. I was a pitch judge for 2 years in Capitalize, which is a crowdsourced NBA pitch competition. I give the military Hero of the Game Award at the San Diego Gulls Arena. None of these things, first of all, let me say this. None of my employees thought any of this was possible. I remember one of the alumni of my company, his name was Ishan. And I told Ishan, we were working late, way too late in the office. And I told him, I said, look at this email. I said, I think we're going to be official partners of the NBA. And he goes, but that's not possible. And I said, I mean, you may not think it's possible, but I'm emailing them now. He goes, how do you even know that? And then I said, I was a season ticket holder and at that time, the Black Lives Matter movement was going on. And little did I realize that there were some meetings about how that different franchises can work with Black-owned businesses, Doug's company starts to come up, right? And I remember later on, I had heard the interns, they had a meeting. I call it the intern army back then. And yeah, they basically said, Doug is like working at a startup's like a cult. I remember I heard that. And then he said, our founder is absolutely nuts, but there is something to be said about if you shoot for the moon, like, you know, hey, you may not get there, but you're going to get really far in life, right? But then we became official partners of the Sacramento Kings and we made a press release. And I just think that doing the impossible, only through entrepreneurism is it possible. Because again, in the organizational structures, you can't do these things.
And so I'm gonna let you define this the way you want to define it, but you've touched on this a couple of times, so I'm gonna come back to it. Does one need to be a little nuts to be a successful entrepreneur?
I call them mad dog rebels. I'd say this like I think it was Glenn Davis, the investor, him and I were talking about it. There are certain behavioral characteristics of entrepreneur that make a good entrepreneur. If you don't blend in with people, that's the good characteristics of an entrepreneur. And listen, like we're here at Oberlin, right? Like this college is about freedom of expression. So many of the Oberlin students, I'm expecting to be entrepreneurs. But that's one. Two, like for example, you know, going out to Cal. So first of all, just moving in general. Look, I lived in Minneapolis, Chicago, New York, California. That sounds like an entrepreneurial person because look, it's one of the most stressful things to move. But when you keep reinventing yourself, again, it's another behavioral attribute of an entrepreneur. The other one, like risky hobbies. You know, when you do your insurance premium, you know, later on, for many of you, you do your insurance premium. There's these boxes that'll say, have you ever parachuted? Have you ever driven a motorcycle? Have you ever, you know, I think it's like scuba dived? I'm checking all of them, all of them, and some. So I do think that an entrepreneur needs to be a risk taker. You need risk averse people around you because they rein you back. But I think that there are behavioral attributes of an entrepreneur. I will tell you the hard skills of an entrepreneur, you have to have financial literacy. Period. I have worked with over 80 startups as clients in 5 years. With startups, you know, my students know, you know, in 5 years, 50% of startups fail, you know. I will say that in 10 years, 99% will fail. The reasons for failure, a lot of time, an entrepreneur will have their craft or their sector or their industry. Maybe they're experienced as an engineer. Maybe they're experienced, you know, in clothing design. But if they don't have financial literacy, not going to make it.
There's this thought of buy versus make, right? Can someone leverage that skill and bring it into the fold? Okay.
I recommend always to have a financial planner, an estate planner, a CPA, a bookkeeper, do that. But the truth is, if the entrepreneur does not have financial literacy, they don't know the questions to ask, they can't make decisions that make fiscal, financial sense, or they can't take calculated risks when things don't make sense. No way. Like I'm telling you right now, if you want to be an entrepreneur, take an accounting class, take a finance class. You need to understand even what a P&L is, profit and loss statement. You got to be able, you can't, there's a story behind every company just by looking at the P&L. I'm telling you, if you look at the debt, you look at the assets, you look at the revenue, there's a story there. And it can be good, it can be bad. It can be good short term, but bad long term. Like, but if you can't read a P&L, you're not going to be successful as an entrepreneur. And some will say I am arrogant for saying that. But see, here's the thing. There are entrepreneurs that you'll read about as, well, this person figured it out and they didn't have any financial knowledge, right? Like,
Right.
people always look to extremes and sensationalism. Like, was it, well, Elon didn't have financial knowledge. What are you talking about? His first business was PayPal. What do you mean he didn't have financial literacy? So no way. Like, I noticed he did that, made his money, and then started doing crazy stuff. Again, that's a data point of one, but
yeah,
you're not a viable entrepreneur without financial literacy.
Okay. And give us, what's the worst advice you ever received, either solicited or unsolicited?
The worst advice, yeah, very good. So when I was, okay, so let me talk about, nothing happens when you don't have working capital, right? And in my business, there was self-funded, and then there was this decision. Do we go to the venture capitalists, those great people that we just talked to, or do we go it our own way? Now that's a hard decision, because let me explain. Like, the VCs love me. Think about it this way. I have financial literacy. From a diversity standpoint, I'm African American. In tech, there's not that many. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. It's a statement of fact, right? I have corporate experience. I'm classically trained. And I'm kind of mad dog rebel too. I check a lot of boxes, but here's the problem. I have seen far too many entrepreneurs and businesses fail due to bipolar management from the board of directors or investors. And frankly, we decided to self-fund and do loans. So we did a 7A growth loan. We did from the SBA. We raised our additional capital needs that way. But there was, at that juncture, I did get feedback that if you take those loans, either A, they could be the catalyst and you were right, or they could be a poison pill. You could fail and lose it all. Lose your house, lose your wife, lose the confidence of your employees, lose everything. I decided that was the worst idea ever. And I, of course, decided to move forward, because the worst that could happen, and this was my feedback to them, the worst that could happen is that I fail. Now, failure, I know it's like some people's heart skips a beat when they hear failure. I've learned throughout my entire life that when you fail at something, you learn way more. It hurts in a more visceral way than any success, any accomplishment. In fact, my wife and my fractional CFO will tell you, I didn't bring this up, but I sleep less. I don't know if you guys know this. So perfectly good example. I landed at Cleveland Hopkins last night at 12:30. I went to the Hilton Hotel, 1 o'clock. I DoorDashed food, 1:30. And I woke back up at 4 a.m. today. I sleep less. It's always been that way. It's a genetic thing. My dad used to not sleep. I sleep 3 hours a night. The advantage I have of sleeping less, sometimes I want to sleep, but then I just say, no, I'm not going to do it. It means that I can read more than most. I can do more than most. I'm highly productive like that. And I'd rather live my life that way. Will it lead to my early demise? My comment to everybody, who frickin' knows anyway? But if that has given me an advantage, I think to live definitely a more intense experience, a more progress-oriented experience. If my children benefited from it, if my wife benefited from it, if the world benefits from it, then what am I afraid of, right? Like, what would I feel cheated? Absolutely not. So I think that as a result of many of these things, that it has given me an advantage as an entrepreneur, and it makes me fight way harder because it means so much more that because I sleep less, I analyze the situation over and over. Like I'm big in scenario planning. Some of the intern army, they call me like Doctor Strange. I don't know if you've seen the Marvel movies, but like he's like, you know, he interprets time. He's like his head's spinning while he's thinking of things. They're like, that's Doug, because he's always looking at a situation 50 million different ways to make the smartest choice. And I think that I'm not saying all entrepreneurs are that way, but that process of really venting a risk, where some will view that's mad dog rebel or craziness, I still look at that. That is calculated risk. That is risk management. Is that you understand, okay, yeah, I'm good. You gotta, it takes money to make money. And you're not gonna shoot perfect every time. But as long as you learn from your failures and analyze situations, you're gonna do pretty well in life.
So we have a bunch of young people that at some point, if they become entrepreneurs, they've got to know when to let something go.
Yeah.
So we've talked about, no, we're not going to quit. We've talked about these things, right? This power to sleep less and drive forward.
Yeah.
When do you know to stop and move on to the next idea?
Yeah. So the corporations teach fail fast. That was like a managerial like thing that you need to kill early. Okay, I wouldn't say I have a different perspective on it. I think that every human being has a life cycle. There's a certain time for certain things. At a certain age, you should be working and training and developing your skills. At another age, you need to kind of see what you got and test your limits, test your boundaries. I think then comes the time for primo gameplay. For me, it was like in my 40s, I'm going to get crazy, right? But you have an understanding of your own mortality, like how much tolerance do you have and how long can you do it? Here's my thing. I just think you have to look at the long, dark road of not trying something. You could, for the rest of your life, regret not giving yourself a chance to try something. If you try something and fail, pivot, learn. I don't know that an entrepreneur, a true entrepreneur, can ever just quit something. Sure, you may exit, but you're still going to keep looking back like, did I forget something? Like, we could have tried this, we could have tried that. It's just kind of par for the course of people that are minded that way. But I'd say things that, going back to this class about feeling confident and building momentum, if you feel that you're making a difference, you got to stay involved with it. If it starts to weigh on your soul enough that it's hard to wake up in the morning and do something, if I talk a lot about in business that your fight or flight response is your own internal barometer of how you should feel of something. If you feel that you want to run away from it, then you should probably think about stopping or whatever you're doing. If you feel that you need to fight it, you probably also should be thinking, these are instincts that are hardwired into you to keep you safe. I think as an entrepreneur, yeah, it's a very personal characteristic to be able to decide when enough's enough. My tolerance for it is ridiculous. My wife would say that. my CFO would say, sail off and be happy, Doug. You can buy a boat, you can do those things, but my comment is, but there's so much more to do. There's so much left to fight. Like, if, you know, my comment is, if my efforts inspires even one person and they go and do something innovative, it can change the world. It can change the world.
So not to turn this into the actor's studio, if you've seen that, but I am curious with you, what makes you happy?
Okay. So there's like happiness personally for me is my wife, my kids, fishing, video games, reading. I'm a simple guy. I don't even need California for that. I can do that stuff anywhere, right? That's personally. I should probably add food. Like, I'm a big foodie. Like, don't get me started on that. Like, you know, seafood boil, you know, all that stuff. Anyway, that I digress. That's another discussion. But I'd say happiness professionally. In corporate, I used to think it was get promoted every 2 years, exceeds ratings, even when people say he's not so smart or X, Y, and Z, then it feels even better. Here's actually, I would love to share with you and the others. So when my father died, one of the things I did to cope with the grief, I got a grief counselor. And the grief counselor came to me, and she had these assessment like activities. And one of the things she said is, if you were going to describe your life and your story, what type of novel would it be? And you know, I'm kind of like, reading is my thing, right? Like, I'm dorky like that. And I told her back then, my story is a revenge tale. Are you kidding? This is a payback for every person that said I was dumb, slow, too small, for every corporation that passed on me for a promotion, for every employee that complained that, you know, I'm too radical. And she just kind of stopped and she said, you have to forgive me. I'm breaking my professional mold, but you have no idea how disappointed I am to hear the great Doug Younger think that your story is a revenge tale. And I go, how's it not? How do you think I've survived as being Black in corporate America and having to start from, you know, nothing and to build myself into something? And she said, I have a lot more work to do on you. So time goes by. And I think maybe 6 to 8 months later, grief. Look, if you guys lose somebody important in your life, even if you lose your pet, deal with the grief. Don't carry it. She did this same assessment later on. And I kind of laughed. And I said, so how'd I do? And she said, in truth, your story is no longer a revenge tale. That's not what your responses say here, that it's a legacy tale. That you're doing this, and you're not even doing this just for your children. You're doing this from like a societal sort of thing. And I kind of grinned and I said, I think we're done here. And that's probably my comment about entrepreneurism and, you know, how you can, as a person, know, and that's my comment to many of the students here, what's your narrative going to be? You know, like, do you want it to be a revenge tale? Is it a love story? Is it this? But the pinnacle achievement of your life, it goes beyond business. It's how you want to be remembered. And if you're not doing something with your life on that level, then you're going to feel empty victories the rest of your life. If you go and work a job every day to help your children grow up, you're being a great parent. But that doesn't always lead to fulfillment. That's different.
Mhm.
Fulfillment is going to come from, there's this insatiable need, I feel, of the human condition. We all want to make things better. It's in our nature. If it weren't, we wouldn't have built these cities. We wouldn't all cooperate. So that's my encouragement to many of you. I think for many of you, the sum of your college experience is to get new experiences. But I hope that if one thing you take from Doug Younger here is, if you really want to find fulfillment, you're going to have to do a lot more than just go to work. You're going to have to do a hell of a lot more. Frankly, you talk about happiness, right? Like, some people get upset, like, well, I'm not happy in my job because my boss didn't give me a promotion, or my boss didn't do this, or my boss didn't do that. It's not your boss's job to make you happy. It's on the individual to find and explore and create happiness opportunities and to reach fulfillment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And if I do that, I mean, if that's the sense, like for me, I think out of this run of my companies and kind of what I'm doing, like I already feel fulfilled.
Mm-hmm.
If I were to die tomorrow, like,
yeah, very good answer. I want to open it up for questions. Anybody have questions for Doug? And I'll give you a moment to think, and I'm going to ask a question I think might be relevant.
come on, OBs.
Yeah. Oh, nice. We have a question. Becca there.
Through your journey to become an entrepreneur, what was like an experience that was kind of challenging, and like what was the life lesson it taught you? / like how did it impact like you going forward in your entrepreneurship career?
Okay. This is good. So, great question. So if I were to look at my company, because I launched my company in the COVID era, every year felt distinctly different. Like there's the lockdown year, the second year there was like the government stimulus year, like all the loan money came out. Then the third year is like everybody spent the money, it was the growth year. And then what we saw now in the like interest rates, inflation went up, it's like the decline year. Let me be clear. As an agency, like a marketing agency, I built 3 Steps Forward to grow. I never built it to contract. And having to take a group that I built like they drank all the Kool-Aid, right? Like grow, challenge the convention. We'll do the impossible. We ever did a campaign with 12 million followers? No problem. We'll do it. We'll destroy all. Like the morale at my company was really like you could feel like we could do it all. But when those changes in the market happened, I had to convert the company to suddenly we have full-time jobs. We had to go hourly. Suddenly, I had to take working capital loans, which I knew I wouldn't want to do from a fiscal standpoint. But if I don't, I can't keep employees employed. To contract and to deal with the financial reality, it's something, one, I regret from the beginning. I know business is cyclical. There's ups and downs, but I didn't want to. It's kind of like Frankenstein's monster. You fall in love with your own pain, right? I didn't build it to contract, and I had to build it to contract. And I wear my emotions on my sleeve. So I shared in the pain of a lot of my employees. And let me say this, like, those conversations when you're up at night, because you guys know I don't sleep now. You don't forget those conversations like that. And it feels like bad karma. And the employees that even get mad and get angry and they point at you and say, you're the one that's the problem. Those things, they never leave you. So that's my comment. When you've been in business a long time, let's say like, as long as I have, there's going to be, because there's peaks and valleys, there's the glass half full, glass half empty, you're going to feel the pain. So that's my only comment, is getting more comfortable with living with that That's probably one of the biggest things I learned. There's another question.
Yeah, about like financing all like your small businesses, and did that mainly come from like SBA loans or like venture capital?
Oh, God.
How'd you like go about, or like previous working corporate, or like have that kind of come about?
Yeah, I think I would go down as Houdini on non-dilutive working capital.
Okay.
Look, here's my comment. Debt is a tool. It's not the end. Okay. Like debt is part of the means. It's not the end. So when I was in corporate working my job, I was building my credit limit, maximizing my credit score. Really, that was preparing me for the time that I became an entrepreneur. I did during, and you got to be savvy, right? So government grants like grants.gov, we've been the recipient of many grants. I have applied to the National Science Foundation and the USDA, even though we're a marketing company, I'm applying for those things. Even if a client doesn't pay for it, sometimes I'll see a client and say, they should really do a USDA grant. They'll say, I don't have money for that. I'll apply for them out of pocket because I know that can create working capital for not just the client, but for us, right? I did do SBA. So if you just want to know, like there's the 7A growth loan if your company's growing. There's the 504 loan if you want like capital equipment purchases. There's micro loans if you're going to do like educational, like smaller programs. There's fintech loans, although they can be kind of toxic. There's private equity loans. So like part of my profession is to be aware of all these doors that can close and open. But I'd probably say for us, we did a lot of personal, like me and my wife, again, that's one of my, like, there's like Batman and Robin. And like, I think in this case, she might be the Batman. And I'm like Robin, like, she carried a big bat in a lot of of my entrepreneurial life because she was able to pay like our housing expenses and the children and stuff so I could go out and fight, right? So, using your retirement savings. Yeah, I used a lot of my retirement savings for building this business. Now, that's completely against the logic. My father would probably turn over in his grave when I did that. But this is how I looked at it. If I start a business and that business survives the test of time, then isn't that my retirement already? This is what I'm going to be doing for the rest of my life. And it opened all kinds of doors. Like, here's a good example. Because of 3 Steps Forward, I started doing webinars at the regional chambers of commerce for free, right? It was crazy. Like I think we started getting where we had like 80 attendees at it was the San Diego Regional Chamber of Commerce. And one of those attendees was, he was the dean of Cal State East Bay. And he just thought my style and the way I teach he said, you're infectious. Clear why there's 80 people here. Come teach at this college. Well, now I'm teaching here at Oberlin. I'm up teaching Sac State, Cleveland State. What you can see is by putting that money to work for me into a business, I'm reaping returns that if it would have stayed in the retirement account, okay, I get 12% S&P growth per year, but how is that making a better life for my children, right? Like one day my children are going to see me up here. You can't tell me that's not legacy, right? You can't tell me that it wasn't worth it. So, but again, if you talk to my financial planners, they're going to say, no, Doug, you keep the money in the bank, right? So at some point in time, you just have to make those choices for yourself. But I would say start with free money first, then move to loans, then move to dilutive equity. And if it doesn't work after all that, like it's probably an idea. It's not worth pursuing any further. Good question.
Yes.
I really appreciate your mindset about, just keep going and learning how to fail. Like, I feel like that's I feel like that's not really ingrained with a lot of people in society right now, and I feel like kind of like the education system's not like. Kind of like, they're not teaching that, like learning how to fail.
Nope.
I guess like my question is like, where did you start to like really like process this new mindset of just like, you know what, I failed, but I gotta keep going, like, I gotta keep working hard, like, I'm just, is there like one moment in your life or that just like clicked and you're just like, I gotta keep moving?
Yeah. Let me say this, failure, the F word, right? Okay. In public, people call it the F word. In yourself, in your own vocabulary, you call it a setback. Okay? You gotta rebrand and rename failure. In your own mind, guess what? In life, and we talked about this in class, there's either success or failure. It's kind of like boxing. There's a winner or a loser, right? Well, why can't we think of failure the same way? It's going to go one way or the other. In fact, I'd argue in life, you're probably more likely to fail more than you succeed, actually, or have setbacks. If you've dated in your life, you know what I'm talking about. You're going to probably go on a lot of dates before you get it right. But if you get it right once you get married, hey, that's all the success you needed. So you got to kind of think of things in a different context. Because I'll tell you right now, as an entrepreneur, maybe it's unique. I'm unique to the category because, again, I make fun of myself all the time. I'm self-deprecating. So I'm kind of like the little Cleveland engine that thought he could, that nobody believed in, that I went to California, right, to battle the masses. And maybe to some extent, all the pain, all the bullies, all the negativity, all the failures were maybe my greatest strength, because I knew how to handle setbacks. And I don't mean handle it like financially. I'm saying like in my heart. That to me, I mean, my wife will tell you, like, I'm even cynical about it now. Like, I already know, like I remember when I started my business, you'll all face this. If you ever try to do something different, you're going to make enemies immediately. And they're going to say, no, you're going to fail. Your parents may say that. No, don't do that, right? Guess what? People think the best path in life is the easiest path. They want you to be a doctor, a lawyer, make lots of money, and live happily ever after, have kids and be done. But how is that going to lead to fulfillment if that's not what you want to do? Some people, that's their pinnacle dream. I used to be that. I was a pre-med. But I can tell you, the kind of stuff I'm doing what I was meant to do pretty clearly. And I'd say adapting, changing the narrative of what the F word is, you have to ingrain in your being. You call it a setback. Setbacks is a different term. It means, okay, you got to take 2 steps back to take 3 steps forward, pun intended with my company, right? You need to be able to look at a failure as an outcome. Either you succeed or you fail. Either you go left or you go right. You either win or you lose. You either live or you die. It's that simple. You have to keep it simple. Keep it simple, stupid.
So with that, let's thank Doug for joining us today on our final Oberlin Speaker Series.
OBs.
Yeah. Thanks for coming out all year. Appreciate it. Thank you.